Hello, everyone. We're going to start the meeting and we'll start off with the roll call. Krista Nielsen.
Here.
Hillary Ormond.
Here.
Bill Perrette.
Here.
Mike Sweeney.
I can see you.
He can hear you.
Mike. Mike. Oh,
Oh, did you just drop off?
we could hear him, but we're going to hold on Mike for a second.
Here he is.
Mike, can you hear us? Mike?
We should all point to our ears.
Can you hear us, Mike? I don't think he can hear. He is there. Bob Strong. I think Bob is here. Maria Weingarten.
Here.
Jane Williams.
Here.
Jeff Williams.
Here.
Chris Wilson here. Okay, so that is everyone. Second order of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on May 12th, 2025. Everybody happy with the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, so Jeff Williams moves. Second.
Second.
Jane Williams seconds. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes?
Here.
Yeah, sorry. So approved. I'm trying to see if he can hear us. Mike? He sees something happening, but he's not yet hearing. We can hear him. Okay, we'll move on. Report of the project subcommittee.
So not working video for Bill.
Yeah, not working video for Bill. This is
No, Bill, can you hear?
I can hear.
You just can't see.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay,
We can
great.
hear
I'm
you.
here. I don't need, you can't see me, which is probably great.
Yeah. Mike, we can see, but I don't think you can hear.
Yeah.
So
If anybody has Mike's number, I'll give him a call. I thought I had it, but I didn't see it in my directory.
I just wrote him an email, but I don't have his.
Yeah, I don't have it either.
so I think iPad
iPad
4
4.
is
That's Bill. That's Bill. iPad 4.
yeah. Yeah, well, he can't see, but he can hear. I don't think it's anything we're doing, to be honest. Okay, so
Now you can see because I just got a message, the host that said I can now start my video. So I think there might be
you're
something
on.
with Mike's connection as well.
Mike, can you hear us? Or check the volume on
Yeah,
his
that's right.
computer.
I can hear you loud. I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, we're gonna assume Mike's issues are Mike's. Project subcommittee.
So the project subcommittee has not had a meeting yet this year, so I don't have anything to report from the subcommittee. I'm assuming we'll talk about consultants later. So I
We'll
won't-
talk about the consultants in
I
a
won't go
little
into
bit.
that. Okay.
Similarly, finance subcommittee has not met. We will probably have a meeting when it comes to talking about some of the costings and how we finance projects once we get to that. Discussion on use of budget allocation. Over to you, Krista.
Okay. So some of us on the project subcommittee have been looking around and talking to people who may be interested in being potential consultants for us in terms of helping us further refine the site concepts that we left off on last year. We don't have anything solid yet, I guess I would say. We're still in the talking phases, but I guess I'll put it out there for the whole committee or anybody watching that, we are looking for an architect type person to help us take the 3 sites that we've identified and figure out how we could put affordable housing on them, what that would look like, how many units, and come up with some conceptual plans. So if you have names of people that might be good at this type of work, bonus points if they've worked in affordable housing. We're all ears right now.
So the goal is going to be to, as efficiently as possible, get some drawings, have a sense of how many units we can put on each site, what they might look like, and then later go and get some costs associated with those.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully this, an architect would be able to do some high level cost estimates as well in terms of construction. So, I mean, it wouldn't be detailed, but I think it would, give us a starting point in terms of order of magnitude. So, yeah, so the thought is if we could get someone to help us with that, then we could present both to the public and to our elected officials, what the options are.
That's great.
Mike, can you hear us now?
I am, yeah, I just started all over again. Sorry about that.
Great.
No worries. So you missed the approval of the minutes, and then I think you came in during the use of budget allocation. There were no reports from either of the subcommittees.
Thank you.
Krista, would you like to talk about target dates for
Yeah,
our
I was just
major
gonna
development as well?
See if I can join the Zoom. But I could share.
So I'll just
Sorry. Not there. That might work. You need to be made co-host. You might need to be made co-host. Okay.
thank you.
No, I gotta find the share.
That is the
thing.
extent of my technical
That was good,
knowledge.
though. That was important.
It's one grade up from turn it on and off.
But that worked too.
Did you try turning it on, turning it off and turning it back on?
I'm just full of them.
Have you seen those bumper stickers about? Has anybody tried turning it on and
Yes.
off and back on in the United States?
Reboot.
Share. Oh yeah, I don't want to be seen.
Too
that.
late.
All right, I'm just trying to figure out. I share photos.
Screen sharing.
Yeah, there should be like this. Yeah, it's not just giving me a screen share option. It's like a specific app. I want to use a specific app. Post tools, screen share. Very well. I don't know about that.
I'll do a little preamble while you're working on that.
that sounds
So, we had a discussion about the 2032 project, for lack of a better term, which is the one that's going to get us the 2032 moratorium. And thinking about that timeline that we need to be cognizant of to make sure that we don't leave ourselves short of time and potentially go over the August 2032 end of the 2028 moratorium. And so Krista kindly put some thoughts down in the Gantt chart, which she is trying to put up on the screen. I think the way to think about the Gantt chart is this is sort of a latest timeline we want to be working to, because it does have the project finishing in first quarter of 2028, which doesn't give us a lot of time to get our COs and documentation in order to make sure we get a moratorium, but and it hasn't yet been cross-checked with the people familiar with the big project timeline, which will be Scott Hobbs, David McCarthy from Heritage Housing, potentially Mike Sweeney, who's been through this from the Housing Authority side. So that would be a next step, but we thought it'd be useful just to lay out Krista's good work for now, and then come back to it as a recurring item as we think about our timelines.
Yeah, I haven't been able
Chris,
to.
I have some info on that I can share when you're ready.
Okay, go ahead, Mike. She's wanting more time.
I chatted with Scott a little bit, prompted by, I think, Krista's question at the last meeting. And I try to refresh myself on how long it took us to do a project. And generally, it was about a 2-year period. All things being equal, of course, assuming we have the land, because we did have the land with the housing authority when we did Canaan Parish and the mill project. It probably took us about a year when we started planning, speaking with site planners, engineers, looking at the site, trying to figure out how to lay out the units, financing. That's assuming a vanilla 4% tax credit type of project, not something more complicated or getting financing from different tranches. And then getting to doing an architect contract and then a construction contract. That was probably about a year, and that's included zoning as well. Wild card would be if there was a zoning opposition or if an appeal was taken. We've been fortunate not to run into that in the past. A lot of interest at the zoning hearings, but generally probably 2 meetings and they were approved by the zoning commission and the last couple of applications that we did. Weather can be a wild card as well. We were lucky that we didn't hit any delays with weather over the winter time, but probably about a 2-year click from start to finish, assuming the land is ready to go.
So 2-year includes everything from your site surveys through to approval through to construction?
Yeah, we had about a year in planning, zoning, contracts, and then we were fortunate. Well, I'm talking about phase 1 on Canaan Parish, and then on Millport that was about a year. But
So it's 2 years before construction.
No, a year before construction and 2 years for construction.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
I'm sorry, can you summarize that for me one more time? A year
So
before?
the zoning, site planning, zoning, tax credit finance took about a year. And
Okay,
then 2 years for construction.
One
Is that
year.
right?
1 year for construction.
1 year? It seems short.
Mike,
Yeah.
was it 1 year for construction and
no, 2 years. I'm sorry.
years?
Two
Okay,
years,
so
yeah.
it's, okay, so it's a 3-year total then.
Yes.
Correct.
Now, the key there as well is they own the land, controlled the land,
Mhm.
didn't have to, source the land, so we would want to leave plenty of time.
Oh, I think it's gonna work.
Do you want to walk? Oh,
Oh.
you did it?
Well, let's try one more time.
We'll all hire her.
All right, well, the short version is, based on what I just heard from Mike, I way overestimated how long construction was gonna take, so we have more time than I estimated.
I think the caveat there is it depends how it looks. The more vertical, maybe the more time, more, Millport is the sort of units where you can start 5, start another 5, and sort of have the trades work their way across the site
Yeah,
versus a Canaan Parish type thing. You have to build the structure first and then dive in. You can't do anything unit-wise in parallel. So that just might involve a longer time.
oh my God, I can't, I'm sorry, I can't share my screen.
It's okay.
This is
So,
becoming great.
we will share this at some point.
Yeah, I'll
Probably
email it
makes
out.
sense to email it once you have some input from others, and we'll talk about it at a future meeting.
Yeah, but I mean, the short version is we should have plenty of time, especially if I overestimated how long construction is gonna take by a year, but we also don't have oodles of time. Like we
Yeah.
have a good amount, but not too much. And all of this, as I've said to Chris, presupposes that, we're able to get at least 20 units at Riverwood, deed restricted, 80% of SMI before 2028, when we have to submit for that moratorium. So that moratorium is riding on 20 or so units at Riverwood being deed restricted,
At what percent did you say? Sorry.
80% of SMI. And we've heard Mr. Hobbs talk about going to AMI. 80% of the AMI is required by the Fannie Mae financing. This would be going beyond that. So that would have to happen by 2028, which is why we're planning for 2032. We're assuming that we've got 2028 under control.
So sorry, so 2028 would be using Riverwood units.
And carry.
And then, so we're talking for this new construction, starting at 2032 and going through to satisfy a moratorium till 2036. Is that
Yes.
right?
Right,
Okay.
that's what we're talking about. And we're assuming at this moment in time that we'll just have to get all 151 Hue points from a development that's done by 2032. As you all know, that may not turn out to be an accurate assumption, depending on what happens with the 830G projects. But we don't know right now. Or if Riverwood can convert more units,
Yeah.
that would also change how many we need to build. So I think it's probably a better, more conservative approach for us to plan for all 151 and maybe be able to back off or scale it if we don't need them. But I think it would be short-sighted to just, cross our fingers and hope something better is going to come along and not
Yeah,
plan for it.
there's at least a few units, I think 4 to 5 coming through in the Vertus project through
It's 3.
inclusionary zoning.
Yeah, 3 units, like 4.5 Hue points.
Okay, 4.5 Hue points. So that's a help. And then, when we put a project forward to the town, there will be a decision point for the town as to whether to push for the conversion of more units in Riverwood or go forward with the project. And, there's obviously benefits to both approaches. But, and we'll probably be asked to do a little bit of assessment on the positives and negatives, but that will be part of the town decision in regard to how to deal with 2032.
2032 is also gonna have a new, I don't know if the census is a little bit,
Census,
it's a little
yeah.
backed up, but we're
Yeah.
gonna have a higher number.
Yes, higher number of units.
Yeah.
Likely. Any questions, comments on that? Okay, next, we thought about, we've been talking about the small site acquisition and criteria for small site acquisition. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts there they want to share.
No, my only thought was that if we didn't solve or, have this conversation here, that we could have it in the project development subcommittee, but
I think that's a good idea.
my only thought.
Everyone happy with that?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, next is the discussion on HB 5002. If you haven't seen, and I passed out a hard copy to everybody here, a number of elected officials and appointed officials in town have signed a letter, including Maria, to the governor. You're not on? Sorry. Okay, sorry, take that back, not Maria. So a number of people have signed a letter to the governor encouraging him to veto HB 5002. For those of you who don't know about the bill, it is a housing bill, but it's an amalgamation of a number of individual bills that were proposed. I've read it twice now. It is a challenging read, hard to put together because it is pieced together from many bills with different objectives. The specific objections raised in the letter were the following: conversion of commercial lots to as of right middle housing. So the commercial lots are anything in the commercial zone in town. That's essentially, think of it as Acme to 123 and Town Hall to Library. It's not exactly that, but that is sort of the bounds of the commercial zone. Middle housing is a concept of townhouses and more dense developments. It's actually the kind of thing we have a lot of in town, kind of naturally occurring middle housing. I guess there's other towns that don't have quite as much of it. And so they thought that it was important to encourage this middle housing, but there is minimal planning and zoning oversight of those conversions. So any office building, retail building, mixed office and retail building in that commercial zone could be converted, and that would affect our property tax revenue as well as loss of retail and pushing potentially in our infrastructure as well. Second point that they've raised is the fair share mandates. So fair share is a concept that we are a constrained state housing wise. It's too expensive, and so we need to focus on building at the most affordable levels. The suggestion that there was a fair share study that came up with various ways to allocate the 130,000 or so fair share units that the legislature deemed are required under the allocation method that's suggested is used in the bill, and the Secretary of State actually makes the final decision, but that allocation method assigns 1,875 units to New Canaan. And there's various types of units that will be included, some as low as 30% of state median income. So those would be units that the rent would be hardly above the cost of operating the unit. So very challenging units to finance. The suggestion is that these can be done either the way we're doing them, where the town builds them, or through 70-30 or 80-20 concepts with market rate development. But if we did it, obviously in a, say, an 80-20 fashion, that 1,875 units would literally be more housing than currently exists in New Canaan, because 1,875 is about 24.4% of our current units of housing. So very hard to see how that would work. There's not an allocation of infrastructure funds. There is some reference to some funding being available, but for that kind of change, it would have to be massive amounts of funding. There's an elimination of parking requirements for buildings under 24 units. The basic concept is the parking would need to be accommodated in existing town parking or street parking. That might work for some sites, probably wouldn't work for others. And there's no real way for the town, for the P&Z to influence that. It just basically completely removes those parking requirements. Then there's some reference to linking zoning compliance with infrastructure grants. Again, it's sort of a punitive idea rather than an encouragement. Those are funds that the town needs already to support its infrastructure, so losing those would be tough. And then, I think some of the more minor areas, if you fight an 830G lawsuit, which is always something to do with care, because developers tend to lose, towns tend to lose versus developers. But the town could be responsible for the developer's legal cost in an 830G lawsuit. And there's just a number of areas here where it's undermining our control through planning and zoning. So the bill has been passed by the House, the Assembly, and the Senate. it's sitting with the governor. It's not clear if he will or won't sign it. Maria knows lots about this, so see if she wants to comment further.
I'll add a couple things. So the commercial as of right, middle housing, that's a concern because really it is the thought that your main streets, you could lose your first floor commercial. And that's the whole idea is you want to have mixed use in your downtowns. You want to have a vibrant economic environment there where your communities can go get their services that they need, sources for employment as well. And so it was really a rushed bill that went through a lot of these sections that were mentioned by Chris. There's a lot of concerning items. We're seeing a lot of municipal leaders throughout the state who have sent a lot of letters. I know as part of 169 Strong, there have been over 5,000 petitions received by the governor already regarding this topic. So that's a concern. Another issue with the parking. This is a policy that was implemented in Bridgeport back in 2021. During COVID, they did some text amendment changes to their zoning rules, and it's really caused problems. I was there, I met with a bunch of people there, and they have serious issues with these projects. They recently had a 74 unit project that was no parking on site. And it's at a really busy intersection on a state road on one side and on a narrower local road on the other. And they have narrow, surprisingly, as a city, they have narrow streets. So these are real quality of life issues for residents. It's also safety issues. And I know that there was some discussion about health and safety was added in as an ability to consider that, but planning and zoning's hands are tied and they cannot be the one to consider, and you cannot deny a project based on that. They also took out fee in lieu. So where you would think that it would be a smart tool in your toolbox as a planner to be able to have fee in lieu in your downtown areas where you would use those funds to then create a parking lot, maybe decked parking or whatever sort of a structure, that ability has been taken away from planning officials as well. And again, a lot of these, and there's no guarantee, there's no affordability tied to any of that. So there's no guarantee. So I think anybody who has, especially with some of this as of right with 9 units, if you had set up an inclusionary policy where you have over 10 units that you're doing, it's not going to work for you anymore. So you'd really have to move it down to 5 units to be able to capture any sort of affordability in some of these, regulations that are going on now. This is that steep grant one is the desegregate plan and what comes with that is you either sign up to have all of your zoning decided on a state level, and you have to allow 830Gs as of right in the transit area. You have to allow within that half-mile transit any development up to 9 units as of right. You have to allow any sort of affordable development as of right. So there's a lot of as of right thrown into this. And the Richfield Planning and Zoning Chair wrote an excellent letter. I encourage you all to read it. It says housing bill hurts small towns and businesses. And it's an excellent summary of some of the real issues. I found it really, really good. It's on the patch. I'll forward it to all of you. I found it on the Richfield patch and it was excellent.
And just on the allocation, the way the allocation under fair share is done, it takes into account your grand list per capita, the number of poor people in your area, et cetera. And so, basically the larger cities don't really have much of a fair share allocation. It falls largely to the smaller towns, and Fairfield County gets a big allocation of these units. So it's meant really to change the face of
and actually
towns like ours.
So if just to briefly talk on fair share, so this is really the original fair share model, which literally took 3 wealth factors and asked how much multifamily you had, and that's how they ranked towns, and that's how they set an allocation out. And it's a broad leap to say that just because you're wealthy, you have access to a job, access to transit, access to all of the things that you would want to necessarily have, in order to, just because you're a wealthy community doesn't mean that you can absorb a lot of that. There are a lot of small towns that may be more affluent that don't have a lot of access to transit or other things like that. What the version that they chose alternative A, actually, it said, it said, don't give any, so that poverty cities would also get an allocation. And it also said that you could get an allocation more than 20%. So it actually gave even more onerous allocations to 26 out of the 169 municipalities in our state, over 20%. So you're being asked to create a fair share, and those units should be, are more than 20% of your currently existing housing stock.
So Governor Lamont came out today, I'm sure you saw, asking for revisions to the bill before he will sign it. He's leaving the country in, I think, 12 or 14 days. So he has asked for some revisions, some of which I have issues with a lot of the things in this bill. But I think I don't know that this summary of the fair share mandate is correct. I thought it was that we had to draft a plan to present that's consistent with fair share. And that would be, it's like part of our 830J filing. So I think it's unfair to call it a mandate. I just want to make sure we all have like correct information.
It's hard to figure that out. So the original proponents of fair share wanted it to be done over 12 years, 2 years to plan, then 10 years to implement. They seem to have backed off that rigid plan, but they are going to assess periodically your progress to your 1,875 units.
I understand that, and I think that the allocation is off. It probably needs to be adjusted, but I don't think that this bill does not mandate that we build 800.
No.
But that's what this summary suggests. So I just want everybody to be clear that this sounds like a fair share mandate where you would have to build a certain number of units.
But I
according
think
to
No,
what you're allocating.
it actually doesn't say that. What it says was that you have a goal, right? And so here's the way they interpreted this is sort of the way they think about 830G.
To say.
The drafters of this bill.
Okay, I'm just trying
Yeah,
to be
no,
clear.
I
because there's a lot of
understand.
pronouncements.
So, and just to be clear, right now, what they're saying is this alternative A total that they gave us, they only want you to deal with 25% of it. So it's really 469 units for New Canaan that they want us to have. And the way the bill reads is to create a realistic opportunity that they will be built. And that's where the rub lies, because these units, based on the way the bill was written and what's in the fair share study, says that most of those units, 84% of the units need to be at 0 to 30% of median income. So when you think about 830G, which says you're doing only 30% at affordable, and half of those are at 60% of median income, and half of them are at 80% of median income. This is saying we want you to do 84% at 0 to, and that's just the fair share number, right? So the question becomes, what is a realistic opportunity? And this is, I think, where you're ripe for lawsuits, because what's a realistic opportunity? And the original version of the bill said that you, as a town, would be mandated to.
That's not the bill that passed. So let's just,
Can I just finish, please? The original version of the bill suggested that you need to provide a financial incentive to make sure that your things are built. That was part of the definition of what a realistic opportunity was. They struck that. So that's not in it right now. Okay. But the question becomes, what percentage? Is it 90-10 that someone's willing to build units that are for 84% of them are for people who make, around $30,000? What's the realistic amount of a spread, right? And
but just to be clear, we've just gone from 1,875 units to 469 units that need to be part of a plan. So none of that, this doesn't, I'm just trying.
But the 469 units are
the fair share,
but also a bulk of them are targeting a very low income, which, financing wise is very difficult to do in the way we've approached 830G.
I understand. And I think to the extent there's some, inconsistencies with 830G, that has to be resolved. I just want to make sure, though, that, we're all working from a basis of truth. And
and this is a basis of truth that.
Can I please finish?
Sure.
Please.
That it's 25% of the 1875 that needs to be part of a plan. So that we look, I mean, listen, New Canaan's doing a great job of meeting affordable housing goals. And I think we're doing, like, we're moving forward. We're talking here as a way to increase it. You know, maybe it's naive of me, but I hope we don't get punished for that. And I think that to the extent we can incorporate it into a plan, I mean, it was like when the POCD was being negotiated, I said, I was very, you know, I was hopeful that we would include something about transit-oriented development, because at least if we have that plan and we look like we're doing it and we're considering it, instead of being so no, 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 no all the time, I think that could go a long way. And so now it's out of the POCD. We didn't get anything about transit-oriented development. We don't have that as like a way to show that we're really serious about this and about meeting some needs in our community. So I think that was a missed opportunity. And I just want to make sure, like I said, there's a lot in this bill that I have a problem with, but I also have a problem when all the information's not out there and it's just riling people up to be, you know, it seems, I just want to be careful. That's
Hillary,
all.
I'm going to say,
Maria, Chris, can I ask a question? Maria, if you were to take, say, 3 towns, New Canaan, Ridgefield, and, you know, Easton or Weston, is this all a matter of percentage of people or percentage of commercial space? I'm just trying to see how different towns are impacted. And, you know, how does this new bill impact the affordable housing question that we've been having? Is it additive? Because, you know, I don't really feel like we get in affordable housing, all of you are much more schooled in this, but, you know, we're fighting to get credit for what we've done in the past. So to suggest that we're going to get credit for what we're doing today, I don't think it's going to happen, right? I mean, that's just life. I'm not being critical of anybody, not being critical of government. It's just life. Things move on. But when you look at the 3 towns, what would be the impact here versus Ridgefield versus Easton?
So Easton, their 25% of their total allocation is 314 units. Richfield's allocation, 25% of there is 364 units. Again, we get dinged more because of the wealth factor, because it really, the way this allocation has been set up is based on your wealth.
Right.
And so ours is 469 units, is 25% of our total allocation. But again, if the assumption is that, and the feeling was that developers would step in to build this, and as Chris is saying, that there's a very low probability of that happening, and that you would have to, if it was somewhere else, not us, because we've been proactively building 100% forever affordable, we are an anomaly in the state. So if other towns were looking to do this, they would, and trying to get a developer to do it, they would have to offer like 90% market value to 10% affordable, I would guess, as your fair share, or maybe even like 95%. And in some places, it likely wouldn't even pencil out because probably the numbers wouldn't really work. So unless there's serious subsidies coming from.
And Maria, the conclusion you come to from that is, in order to promote this amongst the developer community, you have to give them the opportunity to build 90% market and 10% affordable, and then you have to do that to meet your goal. And it's like Chris said, you're gonna
Run away from it.
replicate your housing stock,
Right.
just to accomplish this algorithm.
Right.
But the idea that we would have, you know, the idea that this bill would waive any parking requirements, I mean, that's just not possible, right? Because, I mean, what does that really mean?
it doesn't generally waive parking requirements. It waives them in specific circumstances.
Circumstances, but in that particular case, I mean, it's almost impossible to park in town now. You need to build a garage, you know, which we've talked about, which of course would be borne by the New Canaan taxpayers. I mean, it's a big bill. Big bill.
The way the bill reads is any development under 24 units would not be allowed to require any parking, on-site parking from a developer. It's just up to the developer to decide. And the proponents are saying, well, no developer would do that. Well, I think we've heard already that there was proposals even in New Canaan. I heard that there was a proposal. I think John Engel had mentioned it to me, that someone had come with a proposal and it suggested not having any parking on Main Street potentially, I think, on one of the.
Yes, they did talk about that.
So it can happen anywhere. And so, yeah, these are really onerous, top-down mandates that really would put a lot of towns. And again, I encourage you to read the Richfield, because he talked about the issue is that it then you become sort of a situation where you have to create form-based code, I think, to kind of contemplate any sort of scenario of what might come up, because you only have desk approvals within your planning department. And so, and then there's a legal opinion that was by our friends in my friend in Bridgeport, who is a former judge, who came up with a lot of the case law behind all of the parking situation, and talked about how it'd be very challenging to find any sort of health or safety way to overcome, because they said you could consider health and safety, but it becomes a challenge. So a lot of this is a very quick, chaotic bill that you would have to do a lot of rework, right, as in we're in the middle of dealing with redoing our zoning as it is. So it's a little bit good timing, but not really, if this is now going to just upend everything that we set out to plan for through our POCD.
Yeah.
Sounds
Probably
like
not our responsibility, but one of the things that really always concerns me about things of this nature, whether you're pro or con, it doesn't, some of us are old enough, it doesn't matter whether you're pro or con, maybe you won't be here when it's completed, but the town needs to be our town, as do other towns, need to be transparent with its citizens as to, what the implications of this are short-term and long-term. I mean, that's what you would do in business, right? So at some point we have to wrestle somebody, not this committee probably, but Dan or somebody has to wrestle us to the ground and then talk about it.
Yeah, I think to Hillary's point, it is, there is confusion out there about this. I don't, I've read it twice and read a lot of summaries or articles about it. I'm still unclear on certain aspects of it. So it's, it's a hard bill to parse through at this stage. And hopefully we see some changes to it either now or in the future.
I just sent you guys the article that I saw today.
CT
where
Mirror.
Lamont has asked for revisions. He hasn't really, didn't sound terribly specific about what he wanted revisions to, but I think that's.
So does that mean the legislature goes back into session?
Yeah, they'd have to call a special session.
Okay.
Which they're planning on doing anyway in September, I think, to deal with what might be coming down in terms of funding shortfalls from the federal. And so they were going to come back to session anyway. It's just, I don't know what the bill, I haven't had a chance to read the bill yet, but I mean, not the bill, the article. I think it was CT Mirror, is that correct? Mm-hmm.
So obviously for purposes of this committee, we wanted people to be aware there's nothing to change in our current path. I think we have a good path towards dealing with the legislation that's in place right now. We'll just have to keep watching and waiting and see what happens here and how that affects our mission.
And he'll have to veto it. I mean, I think that's something, that's an important point for people to understand. And it's helpful to say that if he doesn't veto it, it could go into effect. So he'll need
Quickly.
to take, you know what I mean? He can't, if he just leaves it on his desk, it doesn't die. It gets enacted and it's in the form it hits his desk if he doesn't sign it within a certain amount of time or veto it.
It's as of the 9th. So as of the 19th, he has to veto by the 18th, because on the 19th it would be approved.
Couple of things I just wanted to add to this conversation. Number one, Hillary, transient oriented development did make it into the POC.
Oh, I thought it was taken out.
Yeah, I thought it did.
In there.
Oh,
And it's part of the conversation we're having right now about zoning updates.
great. I'm
That's
glad
in
to
there.
hear that. Thank you.
Number two, aren't some of these provisions in here? Again, I have not read this because I'm kind of waiting to see where the dust settles before I take the time to try and digest this thing. Aren't a lot of them or some of them opt in or opt out provisions?
So the as of right middle housing is a mandate.
They talk about fair share as towns take the lead. I think that's what they're referring to as towns take the lead.
I think we could say we
But-
don't want to participate.
No, I know, there's no,
There's,
no
there's
version of you
no,
don't want to participate.
there's no words that say opt-in.
Okay.
There is no words that say that, just because they haven't put in the cudgel yet. or they
Because I've
haven't
seen
put in
that
the
a fair
hammer.
amount in the past with state legislation relating to zoning issues, is that usually when it all shakes out, it comes down to, do you want to opt in, like the marijuana? We could have, marijuana businesses in New Canaan, we've opted out of allowing that in our zoning regulations. But so sometimes I see that put in as sort of a olive branch, like, here's what we want you to do, but you can opt out. So I didn't know if that was part of it. And then the third thing I don't understand is, would the fair share replace 830G? Is it in addition to 830G? Like, how do those two things meld?
They don't,
It's on top of 830G.
it's on top of,
Because we already would have to do 500 units to get 10% of our housing stock, I think.
Well,
500 more units.
presumably if we're delivering town-funded 30% of AMI units, then they would also be qualifying for 830G. But
Mhm.
it's, the legislation essentially stacks. So
Stacks.
you'd have to work out when it's passed how 830G and this interact.
But
Okay.
the articles I read said that.
Yeah. Like tariffs, stackable.
Thank you.
yeah.
Hmm.
So what we heard, and this is what was given to me by some former zoning people. And they said that, so in terms of there are some opt-ins, that's the governor's part of it. The governor has his part of it, and that's the one he's discussed quite a bit, but he hasn't really kind of dug into some of the other parts of it. So the 24, the no parking required, that's a mandate. The, and the only caveat there is for health and safety. The up to 9 units as of right, that's a mandate as well. And it's all commercial. And then the part about fair share, the one thing you can do is you can go back and decide, do your own study, figure out, and it may do an analysis and determine what you believe the need is and what you believe your fair share should be. And it goes, I believe, to the majority roundtable. Not, it said OPM, I think, but I think there was also, I read somewhere about
I thought it was Secretary of State, but I could be wrong.
maybe that's the end of it, but I think it first goes to the majority leader, and he was on a call this morning where I was on a discussion this morning. So I believe it goes to the majority leader and his roundtable, which is not an official commission, and it's, so it's just questionable as to whether your idea of what should be your fair share is going to be what gets approved.
I think it's Secretary of State, but again, it's,
That's ultimately, I think. Oh, you think
I
it's
think
OPM?
I think the bill instructs the Secretary of State to take alternative approach A as the baseline,
Mhm.
but then there's some way of negotiating that baseline with the Secretary of State's office. That's my memory of it. But again, there's a lot in there and it's pretty confusing.
So that's the only part that's kind of optional, is you get to choose which type of fair share potentially if it's approved. And here it says, requires most municipalities to submit information on vacant land as well to the majority leader roundtable.
Yeah, there's a reporting
Yeah.
requirement. I didn't talk about
Fairly
that, but that's a housing authority reporting requirement that's in
Yep.
there.
Yeah, so there are, there's a number of different aspects in that. But that's the part, so it is not, again, there's no else on it, except that you could lose some funding resources, I guess, but there's nowhere where it says it's an option that you can opt out of it.
But you could get more availability of funding resources if you opt in for like sewer upgrades and infrastructure, things like that, right? If you comply with the reporting if you comply.
There's no actual dollar figures associated with what they're giving you.
Okay.
But yeah, there's talk of availability of resources.
But you're required to create a plan if you have in the upper 80%.
Yeah.
Right. And again, no one said that you had to build it, but the reality is when you're putting in things about a reasonable opportunity that will be developed, that's the part where the lawsuits will come about if, you're not complying if you're not, you know, and what that is. There, apparently it's a term, the reasonable, realistic opportunity, I guess is what it is. That's actually a legal term in New Jersey, but New Jersey law wouldn't apply here. But it's uncharted territory for Connecticut.
Things could obviously change over time. It does sound like things could change over time, but you know, where we are right now in the real estate markets, you know, building costs are high enough and interest rates are high enough that it is very difficult. There are a lot of projects that aren't viable even at market rate. So that leaves open the question, how do we make it a opportunity? What does the town need to do in order to have a reasonable expectation that people are going to build these units, with a chunk of them being affordable at a very low income level, therefore very low rents. And you know, things can change over time. Certainly interest rates could come down a little and that would help, but it's hard to figure out how you do that at the moment.
Yeah, and without providing your market rate apartments a parking space.
Right.
So-
But
Yeah, I mean,
there's also the converse to the parking space thing is, you know, if parking was an issue, you would have trouble renting the apartments at some level. But you know, that's something you don't want to get to a point where, you know, our streets are jammed with cars and our parking lots are full.
I completely agree. And I will say that when I first got on town council and was first on bylaws and ordinances, we were approached by a landlord, I think I said this at one of the coffees, who had renovated an upstairs apartment in their commercial building, but didn't provide a parking space. And it was a huge issue with getting a renter. And this was off of Main Street, I think near the library. And that the property owner had come to the town to see if we could do some special dispensation where their renter could park in one of the spaces in one of our parking lots overnight, which is currently not allowed. So if you go by, you know, Morse Court, it's empty at night, which is an opportunity, right? It could be. But we weren't going to obviously we weren't going to write a bylaw to affect one specific apartment. But I think it's an interesting data point. It's totally anecdotal, but an interesting data point that it was very hard for her to rent the apartment to somebody without a dedicated parking space for one apartment.
Yeah, we're not, you know,
But I understand the difference between mandate and like what's actually going to happen. I mean, I think lawyers use terms like reasonable in this so that there is some wiggle room that isn't like you have to do 25 units. You have to have a reasonable expectation. I get that, and it does sometimes create litigation. We'll see what happens. See what happens with the
any other comments, questions before we wrap?
Just one last thing I'll say is that I think it may relate to this, but it may not, that we do have to do our 830J affordable housing plan again in 2027. So yes, if some of this stuff does make it through, we'll have some material to work on for I mean, not that we'd have material to work on anyway, but we'll have some new material to work on.
Is that every 5 years?
Every 5 years. So
Okay.
it was done in 2022. And I don't know, I mean, that would probably be a question for Sarah Carey, how much it's the planning department versus this committee or a collaboration of both. I mean, we should probably start having those conversations. Yeah. Need another consultant.
I'd love to hear that. Consultants and lawyers are going to be very happy.
So the last point I'll mention, which kind of relates to our use of the budget allocation. I was having a conversation with a group of very long time New Canaan residents, all over 50, and how little they knew about what this committee does, where we stand on 830G. You know, the fact that we will likely have to do a project gave me some pause because these were people you'd think would be involved in community matters. So I think it would make sense for us to have I talked a little bit with Jane, with Krista about this, a multi-pronged plan for kind of getting the word out to establish that baseline of understanding before Project A drops. Because the more people understand that the reason we're proposing Project A is that it's very important for our mission, which, the town council and the Board of Selectmen have endorsed. I think that the better off we'll be. So that's something probably to work on in the fall, but, I've put some thoughts. I'll talk more about it in specifics at our next meeting. But that's something, I think we need to have a plan there and execute on it.
Wasn't the ordinance pretty specific on some requirements that we had as an educational responsibility?
Yep.
Well, we should probably go back and look at
Yeah,
that.
Yeah,
That's
to
a good
educate
point.
the town. It
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, and I think the more we have community buy-in, the earlier, the better. Knowing we're not gonna like spring a project on.
Yeah,
this.
when you're educated and you look at this committee, there's unanimity about our purpose.
Mhm.
So we just have to get that across.
The other thing people still don't understand is that our
We're not
job
done.
is that the 830G, the 830G lawsuits are not under our auspices.
Yes,
And that
yes,
whatever happens there will not have been a result of the work of this committee.
yes.
And
yes.
actually, there is one more thing. Section 35, Majority Leaders Roundtable Study requires Majority Leader Roundtable on affordable housing to study the potential issues and benefits of changing 830G exemption threshold from a percentage of qualifying dwelling units in a municipality to a flat numerical value. So our goalpost may be moving as well, just so we're clear.
It's hard to fathom, but okay. Discussion on the timing for our next meeting. We set up the calendar where we have monthly meetings in the calendar. This was under the wise advice from Amy Murphy Carroll. I think we have to think about whether we would like to do a July meeting and an August meeting. Just a July meeting, just an August meeting. Thoughts from the committee?
In my mind, it has a lot to do with the consultant hiring process, and I don't know that I know enough to say. It'd be nice to not have one of those meetings. It's a quiet time of year, but which?
Well, I guess, Mr. Chairman, how do you want the consultant hiring process to go? If we find one or more people that give us a proposal that we think is good, should we be presenting it to this entire committee?
I think it'd be good if the project subcommittee sort of handle it and
Okay.
then present all the names you've talked about so far, are ones that are kind of familiar to
Yeah,
all of us.
they're not going to be surprises to anybody.
So
who's
I
been in
think,
these.
we want to get multiple input in whatever format, but I think if the project subcommittee takes that forward, it's fine with me.
Do we have to issue an RFP? Did we ask about that?
No, we
We
don't.
do not have to issue an RFP. So right now, we're just, like I said, talking to different people and asking them to put together proposals in terms of, the scope of work we talked about and what they think it would
At least
cost.
assuming we don't get any more money.
That would be nice.
I think it's over 50, you have to do an RFP.
So I mean, with that said, I do think we probably should have a project subcommittee meeting sometime this summer, to hopefully figure out a consultant and move forward with a contract. To me, that means we could do that 1 month and then have a full committee meeting another month. I just can't exactly tell you if it would be July or August that we'll be ready to do that. Hopefully July.
So we can assume we have both and have a discussion if we want to cancel one. I don't know. Any other views, concerns on meetings this summer? No. Okay, so we'll leave it as both for now. And depending on the outcome of the project subcommittee and timing of consultant appointments, we may come back to the committee with other thoughts.
Sounds good.
Okay. We don't seem to have any public comments. We have a motion to adjourn. Okay, Hillary motions to adjourn. Jane seconds.
Yes.
Second.
Seconds. We, all in favor of adjourning?
Bye.
Okay,
Aye.
thank you. Good night.
Good night.